Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom, Mir, Ni hao, Buenos dias, Buenos tardes, Hesiche, Aquaba, Welcome. What up, though? This is a recitation and commentary of Pancha Silas, a scriptural reasoning recitation of Pancha Silas and further commentary. So, at the moment, my mind is somewhat rapid. I'm working to calm somewhat, slow up somewhat, but also record this whilst there's still some natural soleil light available. What is Pancha Silas? Pancha Silas is an ethical rubric offered by the Buddha thousands of years ago, 2,000 thereabouts years ago, 2.5, 2.5. Ethical discipline. For anybody, any tradition, and it's actually shared amongst the many different traditions of the earth, which is what precipitates this discourse. Those principles in general, not necessarily in the sequence, are honesty, sobriety, peace, chastity, and sharing. Again, that can be found in the vast many religious traditions of the earth. And that's what this exercise is. It is a collection of teachings, scriptural teachings, straight from the scriptures, English translations, of some rendering, some proximate rendering of those same principles that the Buddha specifically, explicitly articulates 2.5 millennia ago. I'll share a commentary afterwards. So here it is. I'm going to say a blessing before I read from these scriptures and proceed accordingly. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah wabha. Dao ka dao fe chong dao, min ka min fe chong min. Ja. Deus noster qui es in celis, sanctificato nomen tuum. Vaheguru Satnam. Baruch ata Elohim, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher katzanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu l'sok b'dvar Torah. Amen. Kyrie eleison. Sivamastu save jagatehi. Sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. Pagabiyam. Akwaba upendo na amani. Tekiri inisilami. Chintadam vermeer. Leobo vermeer. Womajeka. Ubuntu shabono fekakon. Shishe, Kamasanida, Domo Arigato, Pilama Yellow Wokan Tonka, Toko Doka Shingun, Goman God. God, we thank you for what you bless us. Ata Jame Yatafanami, Ahom, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, Amen. Kutadanta Sutta, 5:26, Book 5, verse 26, from the Digha Nikaya of Buddhist tradition. When a man with trusting heart takes upon himself the precepts, abstinence from destroying life, abstinence from taking what has not been given, abstinence from evil conduct in respect of lusts, abstinence from lying words, abstinence from strong, intoxicating, maddening drinks, the root of carelessness, that is an offering better than open largesse, better than perpetual alms, better than gift of dwelling places, better than accepting guidance. Shmot 21:14 Torah. Exodus chapter 20 verses 1 through 14 from the Torah of Israel, Israeli tradition. Elohim spoke all these words to respond. I am Elohim, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall not have the deities of others in my presence. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness which is in the heavens above, which is on the earth below, or which is in the water beneath the earth. You shall neither prostrate yourself before them, nor worship them. For I, Elohim your God, am a zealous God, who visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the sons, upon the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me. And I perform loving kindness to thousands of generations, to those who love me and to those who keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of Elohim your God in vain, for Elohim will not hold blameless anyone who takes Elohim's name in vain. Remember Shabbat, to sanctify it. 6 days may you work and perform your labor, but the seventh day is Shabbat to Elohim your God. You shall perform no labor, neither you, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, your beast, nor your stranger who is in your cities. For in 6 days Elohim made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and Elohim rested on the seventh day. Therefore Elohim blessed Shabbat and sanctified it. on your far in your more, in order that your days may be lengthened on the land that Elohim your God has given you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or whatever belongs to your neighbor. Patanjali Amma's Ashtanga Yoga Hindu tradition. Ahimsa, non-violence. Satya, truth. Asatya, non-stealing. Brahmacharya, chastity. Aparigraha, non-possessiveness. Anivrata, Jain tradition. Ahimsa Anivrata, non-violence vow. Satya Anivrata, truthfulness vow. Asatya Anivrata, non-stealing vow. Brahmacharya Anivrata, chastity vow. Aparigraha Anivrata, non-possessiveness vow. Matthew, Gospels, Christian tradition. Matthew 19:16-19. Matthew chapter 19, verses 16 through 19 from the Gospels of Christian tradition. Just then a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what holy thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is holy?" Jesus replied. "There is only one who is holy. If you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" he inquired. Jesus replied, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and more, and love your neighbor as yourself." Sir Albani Israel 17:31-37. Sir Albani Israel, the children of Israel, Surah 17 verses 31 through 37 from the Quran of Islamic tradition. Thy Lord hath decreed that ye worship none but Allah, and that ye be kind to parents. Whether one or both of them attain old age in thy life, say not to them a word of contempt, nor repel them, but address them in terms of honor. And out of kindness lower to them the wing of humility, and say, My Lord, bestow on them thy mercy, even as they cherished me in childhood. Your Lord knoweth best what is in your hearts. If you do deeds of righteousness, verily Allah is most forgiving to those who turn to Allah again and again in true penitence. And render to the kindred their due rights, as also to those in want and to the wayfarer. But squander not your wealth in the manner of a spendthrift. Verily spendthrifts are brothers of the evil ones, and the evil one is to his Lord by Allah ungrateful. And even if thou hast to turn away from them in pursuit of the mercy from thy Lord which thou dost expect, yet speak to them a word of easy kindness. Make not thy hand tied like a stingy one's to thy neck, nor stretch it forth to his utmost reach, so that thou become blameworthy and destitute. Verily thy Lord doth provide sustenance and abundance for whom Allah pleaseth, and Allah provideth in a just measure. For Allah doth know and regard all Allah's servants. Kill not your children for fear of want. We shall provide sustenance for them as well as for you. Verily the killing of them is a great sin. Nor come nigh to adultery, for it is a shameful deed and an evil opening the road to other evils. Nor take life which Allah has made sacred except for just cause. And if anyone is slain wrongfully, we have given his heir authority to demand kisses or to forgive. But let him not exceed bounds in the matter of taking life, for it is held by the law. Come not nigh to the orphan's property except to improve it until he attains the age of full strength, and fulfill every engagement, for every engagement will be inquired into on the day of reckoning. Give full measure when you measure away with a balance that is straight. That is the most fitting and the most advantageous and the final determination. And pursue not that of which thou hast no knowledge, for every act of hearing, or of seeing, or of feeling in the heart will be inquired into on the day of reckoning. So walk on the earth with insolence, and for thou canst not rend the earth asunder, nor reach the mountains in height. Chapter Y 1-9. Chapter 1, verse 1 through 9. Tao Te Ching, from Chinese tradition. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. The name is the more of myriad things. Thus, constantly without desire one observes its essence, constantly with desire one observes its manifestations. These two emerge together but different name. The unity is said to be the mystery. The mystery of mysteries, the door to all wonders. So that is an articulation of Pancha Silas, but also as it can be found in additional holy scriptures of the earth. So I mentioned before the basic summary of Pancha Silas: honesty, sobriety, peace, chastity, and sharing. those are specific principles, tangible, practical principles that people can apply at this moment, have an idea about, and know what they are and how to practice them. But there's also further specificity within each of these, discerning like what that actually means, and what is the applicable guidance or rule concerning permissible and unpermissible specific practices of each principle. So before we get to that, though, I'll share that a review of each of the Holy Scriptures that's included here. These are teachings from the Digha Nikaya of Buddhism, the Torah of Israeli tradition, the Patanjaliyamas of Hindu tradition, the Anurvatas of Jain tradition, which is a religion from India, the Gospels of Christian tradition, and the Quran of Islamic tradition, and the Tao Te Ching of Chinese tradition. Now, the Kuddhadanta Sutta from the Buddha explicitly articulates the Pancha Silas. Again, in a different sequence than what I described, but the context is that there is a Brahmin, a priest, who is preparing an offering, a feast, a sacrifice, and has a question about how to perform a portion of that sacrifice, and is aware that the Buddha is known to have knowledge about these types of things, these types of sacrifices. So he approaches the Buddha to ask him a question of how to pursue that. So the Buddha tells him a story about a previous Brahmin from a different period, and the advice that previous Brahmin provides to his sponsoring minister on how to perform a righteous offering. And in that narrative, the Buddha describes a sequence of hierarchy, effectively, of what's favorable and unfavorable in terms of a spiritual practice. And describes all these different types of offerings: charity, tithing, almshouses, eventually study, and then communicates that the highest of these practices is taking a vow to practice this particular ethical discipline. So there's a hierarchy of commitment, and that hierarchy of commitment culminates in the practice of this ethical discipline: honesty, sobriety, peace, chastity, and sharing. I'm going to leave it at that and then go on to the next scripture. In Shemot, Torah, the Exodus, this is actually a very prominent teaching from Torah. It is known amongst the wide community of Jewish brethren, but also as well as Christian brethren, and I imagine a significant number of Muslim brethren as well, because Ten Commandments is one of the few pillars that is known from the widely known from Christian doctrine and the Gospels, as well as within Judaism, obviously. So there's a listing of mitzvot, of commandments that God commands the children of Israel to practice, and the latter four of the five latter principles exactly coincide and coalesce, are congruent, synonymous with what the Buddha describes within the five principles of the Pancha Silas. And so those commandments are conveyed through Moshe Rabbeinu. Continuing on to the Patanjali Yamas. Now, to be honest, as may be indicative from my difficulty in pronunciation, my knowledge of Patanjali and the Patanjali Yamas is comparatively modest. The fact that it also significantly coincides with the Pancha Silas of the Buddha indicates certain validity and veracity within the Patanjali Yamas, and particularly because it's a clear, direct representation of the Hindu tradition in this respect, compared to passages from the Bhagavad Gita that tends to abstain from getting too doctrinal, and even further with the Upanishads, seems to be difficult to find. However, and to affirm. However, when we continue further, we find certain affirmation in the Anurvatas of Jain tradition. The anavratas is a minimal vow. There's a vow that a priest takes, and there's a vow that a lay person or householder or similarly situated individual takes, as a not just a symbol, but as a practice of austerity and cultivated mindfulness and discipline, for lack of a better word, or a differentiated word. A practice of that ethical discipline that is supported by the entire community. So that's what the anavrata is, and the actuality is that the anavratas coincide directly with the Patanjali Yambos, and also very significantly with the Pancha Silas. So again, particularly compared to Upanishads, the Vedas, even the Bhagavad Gita, where there's an absence of kind of like a doctrinal, like do this, do this, do this. The articulation here of the plan, but those teachings can be found in the Bhagavad Gita, particularly, as well as within the Upanishads. It's just a matter of having a concise articulation or passage, comparatively difficult to find for the purposes of this exercise. So we utilize the Patanjali Yamas as a representation and articulation, communication concerning the tradition of Hinduism in India. Continuing on, Matthew, Gospels, Christian tradition. Again, the scenario or the passage read significantly speaks for itself. A young man who's later revealed to as being rather rich. He approaches Jesus because he's interested in experiencing spiritual awakening, spiritual enlightenment. So he asks Jesus how he does this, and eventually Jesus, initially at the very beginning, Jesus says, "Here are the rules of righteousness. Live this way." It's the Torah. It's what was read in the mitzvot provided by Moshe Rabbeinu, and lists it again nearly verbatim in the English translation. And then adds the two of honor your father and the notion of loving others as one would want to be loved. So the golden rule. That's the context, that's how significant these principles are within the teachings of Jesus, and effectively thus within Christian tradition. So we continue on to the surah of Bani Israel within the Quran of Islamic tradition. Surah Bani Israel obviously is the Arabic description of the children of Israel. And so the reason why this passage is included, because it nearly explicitly and comprehensively articulates Pancha Silas within the collective of this passage. It's the articulation is somewhat drawn out in terms of wordage. It's not listed very succinctly like within the Kuttadanta Sutta, but there's additional commentary that is interspersed within the family description, or not the family description, but the ethical guidelines. It's there, and even further throughout the Quran. Honesty, obviously, that's what taught in the Quran. Sobriety, that is significantly taught within the Quran. Prohibition from intoxicants, much harm, little benefit. In terms of peace, Islam, may the peace of Allah be with you. Assalamu alaikum. That's how important peace is in the principles of Islam. Chastity, what does that mean? First of all, it can be very confusing for people who are less familiar with it. Chastity is only having sex in marriage between a man and a woman. Celibacy is complete monasticism. Chastity is different. It is monasticism when one is single, but when one is single, one still has the propensity to marry. So, particularly to bring life, fulfill procreation, which is, again, one of the mitzvah within the Torah. And so instead of I'll say it like this: in this passage, or in this passage of the Quran, the principles are articulated, but when it comes to chastity, There is reference and inclusion within this, even though there's an absence of the specific articulation as there is within Kudunat, as I said previously within previous Holy Scriptures. Again, that being the case, I'm repeating myself now, but that being the case, there is additional teachings throughout the Quran that emphasize each of these. Sharing, zakat. One principle to describe chastity is chaya, humility, humbleness, not just in terms of sex and sexual interaction and intercourse, but in terms of just relationship with everyone around ourselves. What we eat, how much we eat, what we share with others, how much we take, how much we give. Humbleness, whether that's mind, body, or spiritual experience. So each of these is covered to a certain extent within this specific passage, but even further, each of these are mentioned multiply, numerous occasions throughout the Quran. So we'll continue on. The concluding text in this sequence is the Tao Te Ching. This comes from Chinese tradition. The passage is chapter Yi Uno a Nueve. That is chapters 1, verse 1 through 9. I already shared that. But now here's the thing with a passage from the Tao Te Ching. There's an absence of a specific explicit articulation of Pancha Silas here, because that's not the nature of Tao Te Ching. There's very little doctrination within the Tao Te Ching. There's very few edicts of saying do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. Instead, what the Tao Te Ching offers is a conversation and an understanding about how things are. So rather than saying do this, don't do that, do this, do that, what Tao Te Ching says is, you're welcome to sit down. You're welcome to try this. You can expect this to happen. You can try that. You can expect this to happen. Either way, blessings. That's the nature of Tao Te Ching. So in this chapter 1, the consideration is finding a chapter that optimally conveys that experience of reconciliation in an immediate sense, but also in a further general relational sense, rather than just some in response to an isolated static occurrence, as often doctrines can be, without knocking doctrines. So in this chapter, basically, I'll get into further explanation about like commentary or whatever. So when necessary, because a lot of this speaks for itself. It's just a matter of recognizing that it's here. And so I may wrap up with that. But it does warrant some explanation about the Tao Te Ching, because again, those 5 principles of honesty, sobriety, peace, chastity, and sharing abstain from being specifically articulated or with any approximation of such articulation. So why is this included? 1, it's including the Chinese tradition. 2, when we look further into the studies of each of these scriptures, the Holy Scriptures of Earth, there is additional widespread spiritual guidance and teaching concerning the nature of desire and the harms that come from feeding that nature of desire. That desire being for something for which we abstain from having due necessity from, but may provide some type of euphoria or otherwise in the process. However, when indulging in that, then challenges emerge accordingly. And so that's what is articulated, that's what is addressed within this opening passage of the Tao Te Ching, describing the Tao as existing beyond any name that can be applied to describe the Tao, even Tao itself. However, in the meanwhile, there is a companion. Well, we can put in that framework. The second line affirms the first line, but in a different context. Instead of talking about the Tao, it says the name. So the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. So when one is looking for eternity, one must proceed beyond the names. The names are temporal constructs that only approximate a phenomena and understanding thereof. From all this, the chapter then goes on to describe how the distinction and the different implications and consequences of desire and non-desire. So when one is attached to the temporality, the material things, or the temporal experiences of this life, of this earth, then one is increasingly susceptible to the downfalls of that something. And simultaneously somewhat not say opposite, but complementary to that. When one is without desire, when one isn't interested in controlling or owning something else, then the essence of that object becomes increasingly known by the actor. It is a scenario where one shows a lack of interest in something, and that lack of interest, because of that lack of interest, that something becomes increasingly proximate with that person. So that is called the balance within the universe. It goes on to describe nature of light, soleil, and the relationship with moon. That balance is intended to quell the desire, so that one can become increasingly mindful of the essence rather than just observing the consequences. And one way to cultivate that calmness, that harmony, is through the ethical discipline: honesty, sobriety, peace, chastity, and sharing. Without that discipline, recognizing the susceptibility towards the absence of the ethical discipline. So that's that. Continuing on to the next one. Oh, that's it. So those are the teachings. Again, it's on one page. And it is the foundation of world expression of Pancha Silas, in our estimation and in our practice. Think of anything else practical to share at this moment. As I mentioned, each of these communicates this ethical discipline. Some communicate it increasingly explicitly compared to others. Some communicate it increasingly succinctly or expediently compared to others. We can look at the specific articulations. Absence from destroying life. We can look at that one specifically. Absence from destroying life. We can recognize that as being peaceful, not to kill other things, particularly others that are like ourselves, humanoids, and additionally. We can also apply that towards killing animals and other sentient beings, particularly only just for the purpose of maintaining and providing nutrition for our own lives. So that's part of the notion of absence from destroying life, absence from taking what is not be given, not to steal. But even further, as is taught within additional traditions, it gets further detailed within that in terms of like how to complete proper taxes and not steal from the government, not to steal from each other, and additionally, so what actually is stealing, particularly when things have been stolen previously to that premise of stealing. Abstinence from evil conduct in respect of lust. So that's basically the articulation concerning chanting. It is the discipline of chastity. Again, sexual intercourse only in marriage between a man and a woman. Obviously, for myself, fatigue factor is a side note. For myself, in my articulation, my concentration is affected by fatigue at this moment, and so I consider how appropriate it is for me to labor in this for the sake of doing it whilst there's still daylight, whilst I may be able to record this later. I'm going to forge on and complete this, and then review it afterwards, and see if it's appropriate whether to record it or keep it as is. So, and this is without notes. So the interest of doing this extemporaneously, I recognize that after reading scriptures, you'll wait, and then the lightheartedness and joyness or whatever, or the sing-song becomes increasingly sober. So, and the weight can be felt further. I'm just thinking, like, there's so much that could be done, that is done, and that could be like studied just from this page. We can look at the explicit articulations, the exact explicit congruences between these articulations, and what we glean from that. What's to be emphasized from that? Is this particular principle important? For example, the ones that. Oh, before I say that, what else can we do? We can go into each particular principle and talk about what that actually is, and then how that might differentiate. What the intentional differentiation may be from each of the different traditions here. We can talk about narratives that inform how those principles are to be practiced. We can talk about how these principles are practiced to be practiced with the different relations that we have within our walk, within our community and society, family, community, and society. So, I said first the congruences. What I'll say first is that Kuddhadanta Sutta from Buddha, the one that specifically articulates all 5 principles. In comparing it with the Torah of Israeli tradition, the Torah, if we look at the concluding portion or passage here, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So right there we have do not kill, do not commit sexual indecency, otherwise practice chastity. You shall not bear false witness, don't lie. So that directly coincides and congruent with absence from lying words. And don't steal. I skipped that one just a minute ago. Do not steal. So to share. So again, we go back to like, what does that mean to share? It means at the very basic, don't steal. So that's articulated here. But even further, it's a matter of recognizing that when we are provided with things, and particularly when we have like an excess or something beyond our needs, that we have, particularly in those situations, even without that necessarily situation, but particularly in those situations when we have that experience to share with others, the responsibility in accounting and attending to the genuine needs of others. That's different from giving a panhandler a couple bucks here and there. That's not the advisory. The advisory is being further proactive and preventing that from happening, but investing in a methodology that is increasingly confident, that there's increasing awareness that the contributions are utilized in a proficient way, rather than just for personal interests or whims or whatever else. So there's a whole field of sharing, but at the very least, not to steal, and then to be honest and compassionate and modest regarding what we need and what we can give, what we take and what we give. So that's part of things. Now, again, in the articulation here immediately within Torah, it is absent the articulation is specifically on do not steal. That commentary, that further guidance about what sharing actually is absent from this particular passage, but it is rife throughout the Torah. From offering tithes, the korban, the notion of tzedek, kiddushim, and additionally. So that's part of it. So we can look at where there's a differentiation between the Torah and what the Patanjali shares. So, well, first it was look at the fifth principle of the concluding five. That's different from what I said Patanjali from the Pancha Silas that the Digha Nikaya, that the Buddha provides. One of the principles from the Torah and these 10 mitzvot is coveting neighbor's house. That can be looked at as, or understood as, jealousy of like trying to get something somebody else has, and that might be perceived as related to stealing. But it's not even just a matter of stealing, because a person can want something and be jealous of somebody without having the intention of stealing it. But at the same time, the person, that same angst can influence a person in a negative way to treat that other person unfavorably for whatever intended purposes. So to avoid that lack of discrimination, that lack of fairness and honesty, emet, it's a matter of abstaining from wanting whatever anybody else has, not being jealous of it. Yeah, they got that, cool, that's fine. Don't make me none. So don't make me none either way. So that's like the basic gist of not coveting, and that means again, whatever those around us have. From large to small, and I mentioned narratives. At this moment, if I share narratives, it would get way long. So I'm gonna hold that for the moment. The Patanjali Yamas, again, to be honest, I'm comparatively modest in terms of my direct familiarity with this. It explicitly or specifically, comprehensively coincides and is congruent with the Anarvatas, with which I am increasingly familiar. And it's also like legit, just because it is full stop. Again, the specific correlation between this and the Kuddhadanta Sutta, ahimsa, nonviolence, correlates with what the Buddha says: abstinence from destroying life, satya, truth. Again, very explicit, plain. The correlation within the Kuddhadanta Sutta may be recognized as absent from line words, is what is shared within the Kuddhadanta Sutta. So, The additional mitzvot that are articulated within this of the tradition of the Israeli tradition are basically relationship with God and with walking of the earth. So it's a matter of the establishment of monotheism, the affirmation of monotheism within the tradition of Israel, recognizing the oneness of God, the oneness, the ultimate reality, singularity of the universe, that all things are part of, that permeates all things. So that's the foundational establishment, Shema, and then from there, to avoid submitting oneself to the perceived existence of anything distinct from that singular reality. So that's particularly articulated in respect to the graven image, and discussion about prostrating oneself, funny. And then again, further, the relationship between Elohim and the practitioner. That when there is abrogation of the mitzvot, then consequences accordingly, and that when there is fulfillment of the mitzvot, benefits accordingly. So the carrot and stick, we can look at that with that binary. Similarly, within the Quran, definitely paradise and the abode of fire. It's molten brass, but the unpleasant place. Then there's also, in terms of that binary, yin and yang without the qing, and also not just yin and yang, we're just recognizing cause and effect. And it's not opposites, it's complementaries. So that's some broader context. Going to, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to share with Anurvatas or the Patanjali Yamas. One of the distinctive things is that with Anurvatas, it's actually a vow that directly is practiced by, recited and practiced by the practitioner. So that's, whereas these additional are actual doctrines that are memorized and recited and studied. The Anurvatas has a certain accessibility that readily translates the doctrine into an edict that influences human behavior. Within the Gospels, Christian tradition, again, there are four principles that explicitly directly overlap or that are congruent. You shall not murder, destroying life. You shall not commit adultery, evil conduct in respect of lust. You shall not steal. Abstinence from taking what has not been given. You shall not give false testimony. Abstinence from lying words. So that's right. That's it right there. Now, again, Jesus goes further to say, honor your father and mother. So right there we have an affirmation of family, husband and wife, marriage, marital relations between a man and a woman, which is actually something that's extremely significant within the context of Christian tradition, historically as well as contemporarily, with the practice of the historical practice and continuing practice of celibacy within Christianity, particularly the leadership historically within Christian church. So for that to be here, for Jesus to proclaim that explicitly, is a fundamental phenomenon. And then it continues on to describe love your neighbor as yourself. So again, that is less of a provocative articulation, however extremely valuable all the same. The golden rule, the measure through which to engage the brethren of this life. So that's the basic gist of it. Recognizing that the fatigue levels, I don't know how much the redness of the eyes is showing, but Fatigueness level affects the concentration, that affects the succinctness and coherence of the articulation, the verbalization. We're going to keep it at this for the moment. Like I said, I may review this before making a decision about uploading. And there it is. I may also provide like a record and an addendum for things that I didn't necessarily record in this session, and there may be notes, organized notes for that, recognizing where this thing went. So that being said, there's benefit within what's shared today, and we continue. Alhamdulillah, Rahman Rahim, Allah, Dao, Fei Chong Dao, Ming Kun Ming, Fei Chong Ming Ja. Daí os nossos aqui, essentially, são aqui do nome tu, Bahai Gusalam. Baruch Ata Elohim Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Asher Ksanu B'Midat David Tzivanu, Yisok B'Davai Torah. Amen. Kyrie eleison, Silva Master, Sarigatahi, Sabai, Satav, Pontus Kita, Fagabien. Aquaba, Upendo Naman, the Kyrie in the Salami, Chinta Dam, Pelman, Libo, Man, Rumajaka, Ubuntu, Shubon, the Fekako. 谢谢，跟我是你的莫尔的，朋友们也了我的这个东西，我们来聊了很多这个事情，啊，这样也都可能后我们选择相对。Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom, Mir, Zaijen, Adios, Techakoris, SMP, na Asamoje, Killing Ufred, and love and peace, happiness, liberation.